I'm sitting in my lawyer's office right now, still trying to process what's happened over the past 3 months, and I figured the internet might be the only place where people would actually believe the story. Because honestly, if someone told me this happened to them, I'd think they were making it up for karma. But here we are. My name is Marcus, I'm 32 years old, and I'm a high school history teacher in Portland, Oregon. Or at least, I was. I'm not sure what I am anymore. 3 months ago, I was living paycheck to paycheck in a one-bedroom apartment, driving a 2009 Honda Civic with 180,000 miles on it, and eating ramen for dinner more often than I'd like to admit. Today, I'm somehow worth nearly $9 million, and I'm being sued by people I've never met who think I manipulated their dying father. Let me start from the beginning, because this whole thing is absolutely insane. It was a Tuesday in late August, right before the school year started. I'd spent the day in my classroom setting up for the new semester, putting up posters, organizing desks, making sure my lesson plans were ready. I was exhausted and starving, and I didn't feel like cooking, so I stopped at this little diner called Rosie's on my way home. It's one of those classic American diners, red vinyl booths, checkered floors, a jukebox in the corner that hasn't worked in 20 years. I'd been there maybe a dozen times before. Good coffee, decent burgers, nothing fancy. I sat at the counter because all the booths were full, ordered a cheeseburger and fries, and pulled out my phone to scroll through emails. That's when the man next to me spoke. "You're a teacher." It wasn't a question. I looked over at him, older guy, probably mid-70s, dressed in neat but worn clothes, nursing a cup of coffee. He had kind eyes, the type that crinkle at the corners when he smiled. Yeah," I said, a little surprised. "How'd you know?" He gestured to the tote bag at my feet, which had Mr. Chen, History Department, Lincoln High School printed on the side. "A gift from my students last year." "History teacher," he said, reading the bag. "That's wonderful. We need more good history teachers." We started talking. I don't even remember how the conversation evolved, but before I knew it, we were deep into a discussion about World War II, the Korean War, and the way history gets simplified in textbooks. His name was Walter Brennan, and he was a Korean War veteran. He told me stories about his service, about the friends he'd lost, about coming home to a country that didn't really acknowledge what they'd been through. I was fascinated. This was living history sitting right next to me, and as a history teacher, I couldn't help but ask a million questions. Walter didn't seem to mind. In fact, he seemed happy to talk. He mentioned that not many people wanted to hear his stories anymore. His kids were too busy, his grandkids were more interested in their phones, and most of his veteran buddies had already passed. We talked for almost 2 hours. My burger got cold, I didn't care. Walter told me about meeting his wife at a USO dance, about building his first house with his own hands, about working as a machinist for 40 years at a local factory. He showed me a photo from his wall at him and his wife on their 50th wedding anniversary. She'd passed away 5 years ago, he said, and things hadn't been the same since. When we finally wrapped up, Walter picked up both our checks despite my protests. "You gave an old man a wonderful evening," he said. "Let me buy you dinner." I thanked him profusely. We shook hands, and he said, "You're a good kid, Marcus. The world needs more people like you, people who actually listen." I walked out of that diner feeling really good. It had been such a genuine, human connection, the kind you don't get very often in our increasingly digital world. I thought about Walter a few times over the next couple of weeks, wondered if I'd run into him again at Rosie's. I even stopped by the diner a few more times hoping to see him, but I never did. Then, in mid-October, I got a call from a law office. "Is this Marcus Chen?" "Yes. This is Patricia Hoffman from Hoffman and Associates. I'm calling regarding the estate of Walter James Brennan. Do you have a moment to talk?" My first thought was that maybe Walter had put me down as a reference for something, or maybe he'd mentioned me in some veterans organization. I had no idea why a lawyer would be calling me about his estate. "I'm sorry to inform you that Mr. Brennan passed away on October 3 RD, she continued. My heart sank. I'd only met Walter once, but hearing he died genuinely upset me. He'd been such a kind, vibrant person, full of stories and life. "I'm very sorry to hear that," I said. "Mr. Brennan named you as a beneficiary in his will." We'll need you to come to our office to discuss the details. Would you be available this week? I was stunned. A beneficiary? Maybe he'd left me some personal item, a book, or something. That would be incredibly thoughtful, if a bit unusual given we'd only met once. I took time off work that Thursday and went to the law office downtown. Patricia Hoffman was a woman in her 50s, professional and kind. She offered me coffee and sat me down in a conference room. "Mr. Chen, I'm going to be direct with you because this is going to be quite a shock," she said. "Walter Brennan has left you the entirety of his estate, with the exception of a few small personal items designated for family members." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because that couldn't possibly be what she just said. "I'm sorry, what?" "Mr. Brennan's estate, after all debts and final expenses, is valued at approximately $8.7 million. He's left it to you." The room started spinning. This had to be a mistake. A joke. A scam. Something. That's not possible. I met him once. One time. We had dinner at a diner. That's it? Patricia nodded like she'd been expecting this reaction. "I understand this is overwhelming. Mr. Brennan came to us about a week after meeting you and completely rewrote his will. His previous will left everything to his 2 children, with some provisions for his grandchildren. The new will leaves the bulk of his estate to you." "But why? Why would he do that?" She pulled out a letter. "He left this for you. Perhaps it will explain." My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter on plain stationery. Walter's handwriting was shaky but legible. "Dear Marcus. If you're reading this, I've shuffled off this mortal coil, as they say. I hope it wasn't too painful and that I got to enjoy one last good meal before I went. You're probably confused as hell right now, pardon my language, so let me explain. Our conversation at Rosie's Diner was the first time in 5 years that someone actually listened to me. Really listened. Not just waited for their turn to talk, not just nodded along while thinking about something else. You listened. My kids, Daniel and Susan, they're not bad people. But they're busy, and I'm just the old man who needs things. They visit out of obligation, not because they want to hear my stories or spend time with me. My grandkids barely know I exist beyond the checks I send for birthdays and Christmas. When Margaret died, I thought my family would pull together, but instead, everyone just got more distant. I spent the last 5 years feeling invisible. Then I met you, and for 2 hours, I felt seen again. You asked questions. You cared about my answers. You treated my experiences like they mattered. You reminded me that my life had meaning beyond just existing and waiting to die. I know this is going to cause problems. My kids are going to be angry, and I don't blame them. But here's the thing: I spent 40 years working my tail off, investing carefully, and saving every penny so I could leave something to my children. And you know what they're waiting for? The money. Not the stories, not the wisdom, not the time with their old man. Just the money. You didn't want anything from me. You just wanted to listen. That's worth more than anything in my bank account. I'm leaving you my estate because I want it to go to someone who reminded me what it means to be human. Someone who values connection and conversation. Someone who might actually appreciate what it took to build this nest egg. Don't feel guilty. Use this money to live a good life. Travel, if you want. Start a family. Buy a house. Quit that teaching job if it's wearing you down, or keep teaching if it makes you happy. Just live, Marcus. Really live. That's all I want. And maybe, once in a while, when you're at Rosie's Diner, order the cheeseburger and think of an old man who spent one evening feeling less alone. Your friend. Walter Brennan. I was crying by the time I finished reading. Patricia handed me a box of tissues. "Take all the time you need," she said quietly. When I'd composed myself, we went over the details. Walter's estate included his house, which was paid off and worth about $450,000, various investment accounts totaling roughly $7.8 million, his car, some personal belongings, and a small life insurance policy. After estate taxes and legal fees, I'd be inheriting approximately $8.7 million. Has his family been notified? I asked. Patricia's expression became more guarded. They have. And I'll be honest with you, Marcus, they're not happy. Daniel and Susan Brennan have already contacted us with intentions to contest the will. They believe their father was not of sound mind when he made these changes, or that you somehow manipulated him. But I only met him once. How could I have manipulated him? Logic isn't always a factor in grief and anger, Patricia said. They're entitled to contest the will, and they likely will. However, I want you to know that we evaluated Walter's mental competency extensively when he made these changes. We had him assessed by a psychologist, we documented his reasons thoroughly, and we ensured everything was done by the book. Walter knew exactly what he was doing. Over the next 2 weeks, I had to make several more trips to the law office. I met with financial advisors, signed approximately 10,000 documents, or that's what it felt like. And tried to wrap my head around the fact that my entire life had just changed because I'd been nice to an old man at a diner. The money hit my bank account in early November. I literally just stared at my phone for 20 minutes looking at my account balance. $8,734,562.18. It didn't feel real. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not my friends, not my family, not my colleagues at school. I just went to work every day and came home to my apartment and sat there feeling completely overwhelmed. What do you even do with almost $9 million when you're a 32-year-old teacher who's been barely scraping by your entire adult life? I did make one major purchase in those first few weeks. I went to a veterinary clinic and paid off every single bill for every animal currently in their care. It cost about $23,000, and the staff looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but it felt like something Walter would approve of. He'd mentioned in one of his stories that he'd always loved dogs but couldn't have one in his current living situation. Then, in late November, I got served. Daniel and Susan Brennan were suing to have the will overturned. Their legal filing claimed that Walter had been suffering from dementia, he wasn't, that I'd manipulated him during a vulnerable time, I hadn't, and that the will was the result of undue influence, it wasn't. They wanted the will thrown out and the estate divided according to Walter's previous will. I had to hire my own lawyer, a woman named Jennifer Cho who specialized in estate litigation. She was confident we'd win, but she warned me it could take years and cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees. The good news is you can afford it, she said, which felt like the weirdest silver lining ever. The lawsuit became public record, and that's when things really went sideways. Somehow, a local news outlet got hold of the story. Local teacher inherits millions from stranger, family cries foul. It was presented as this heartwarming story of an old man rewarding kindness, but the comments section was brutal. He obviously manipulated that old man. This is elder abuse. The family deserves that money, not some random stranger. Gold digger. Gold digger. I was being called a gold digger for having a conversation with someone at a diner. Then the story went viral on social media. TikTok, Twitter, Reddit, which is why I'm posting here now, everywhere. People were debating whether Walter had the right to do what he did, whether I deserved the money, whether his kids were entitled to their inheritance. Some people thought it was beautiful, others thought it was a scam. I became diner guy in various online circles. My principal called me into her office. Marcus, we need to talk about this media attention. I explained the whole situation to her. She was sympathetic but concerned about how this might affect the school. Parents were already calling asking questions. Some thought it was wonderful and wanted to congratulate me. Others were suspicious and didn't want their kids being taught by someone involved in such a questionable situation. Take a leave of absence, she suggested. Just until this dies down. We'll call it personal leave, paid, and you can come back when things are calmer. I agreed, though it felt surreal to be put on leave because a kind old man had left me his money. With time on my hands, I started really thinking about what to do. Jennifer was handling the lawsuit, which she said could take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years to fully resolve. In the meantime, the money was mine to use, though she advised being somewhat conservative until the case was fully settled. I moved out of my crappy apartment and rented a nice but not extravagant house in a quiet neighborhood. I bought a reliable used car, nothing flashy. I paid off my student loans, which felt better than I can possibly describe. I set up trust funds for my nieces and nephews. I donated to several charities Walter had supported. And I started seeing a therapist because this whole situation was messing with my head in ways I hadn't anticipated. The guilt was the worst part. Not guilt over taking the money Walter had explicitly wanted me to have it. But guilt over the fact that his kids were hurting, guilt over the fact that I was wealthy now while my teacher friends were still struggling, guilt over the fact that my life had become infinitely easier because of someone else's death. My therapist helped me work through it. You didn't do anything wrong, she kept reminding me. You were kind to someone who needed kindness. That's all. In December, I finally met Daniel and Susan Brennan. It was at a mediation session set up by our lawyers to see if we could settle this without going to full trial. Walking into that conference room and seeing Walter's kids was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Daniel was 54, a corporate lawyer in Seattle. Susan was 51, a real estate agent in Portland. They both looked so much like Walter that it made my chest hurt. They hated me. I could see it in their eyes. The mediation started with everyone's lawyers making their cases. Then Daniel spoke directly to me. You had no right to that money. That was our father's life's work. He built that for his family, not for some stranger who probably saw a vulnerable old man and swooped in. I didn't swoop in. I had a conversation with him at a diner. That's it? One conversation and he leaves you everything? That doesn't seem suspicious to you. Susan chimed in, her voice cracking with emotion. He was our dad. He was supposed to leave that to us. We were his children. I pulled out Walter's letter and slid it across the table. Maybe you should read this. They read it in silence. When they finished, Susan was crying. Daniel's jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. This is bullshit, Daniel said. He was just lonely and confused. You manipulated that loneliness. I didn't manipulate anything. I listened to him. That's all I did. You don't understand, Susan said. We tried. We visited him. We called. But he was so difficult. He only wanted to talk about the past, about the war, about Mom. We had our own lives to live. We had jobs and kids and responsibilities. And there it was. The real issue. It wasn't that they didn't love Walter. It was that they'd been too busy to show it in the way he needed. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. I'm sorry you're in pain. I'm sorry this happened. But your father made his choice, and he made it very clearly and deliberately. I'm not going to apologize for being kind to him, and I'm not going to give up what he left me because you wish you'd spent more time with him. The mediation didn't resolve anything. We left that conference room more divided than when we'd entered. The lawsuit continued. January came, and depositions happened. I had to give testimony about my conversation with Walter, about my background, about whether I'd ever asked him for money, I hadn't, about whether I'd sought him out again after our dinner, I tried to run into him at Rosie's, but with no ulterior motive. The lawyers from the Brennan side were brutal, trying to paint me as a con artist. But here's the thing, I had nothing to hide. The truth was simple, I met Walter, we talked, he appreciated it, and he made a decision. Patricia's law firm had extensive documentation of Walter's mental competency. They had the psychological evaluation showing he was of sound mind. They had notes from their conversations with him where he'd explained his reasoning clearly and consistently. In February, Jennifer called me with news. They want to settle. What? The Brennan's lawyers know they're not going to win. The evidence is too clear that Walter was competent and made his own free choice. They're offering to drop the lawsuit if you agree to give each of them $500,000, $1 million total. It would still leave me with over $7 million after legal fees. What do you think I should do? I asked. It's your decision, but I think they're going to lose if this goes to trial. You could fight it and potentially keep everything. I thought about it for days. I thought about Walter, about his kids, about what he would want. I reread his letter probably 50 times. In the end, I agreed to the settlement, but with conditions. Each of them would get $500,000, but they had to donate $50,000 of it to veterans organizations in Walter's name. They also had to agree to stop talking to the media about the case and to sign non-disparagement agreements. They accepted. The lawsuit was officially dropped in early March. Just like that, it was over. I'd gone from broke teacher to millionaire to lawsuit target to settlement negotiator in less than 6 months. Now, in late March, I'm trying to figure out what comes next. I'm not going back to teaching, at least not right now. Maybe never. Not because I don't love it, but because this experience has given me an opportunity to think about what I really want to do with my life. I'm thinking about starting a foundation for veterans, specifically focused on combating the isolation and loneliness that so many of them experience. Something that would connect them with people who want to hear their stories. A living memorial to Walter and everything he taught me about the importance of listening. I'm also planning to do some traveling. Walter mentioned in one of his stories that he'd always wanted to go to Ireland, where his ancestors came from, but he never got the chance. I'm going to go for him, and I'm going to bring his ashes. Susan agreed to let me have a small portion after the settlement. I'll scatter them somewhere beautiful and green, somewhere he would have loved. I bought Walter's house from the estate. Daniel and Susan didn't want it, too many memories, so it went to auction and I purchased it. It's a beautiful craftsman-style home with a front porch and a garden out back. I'm fixing it up slowly, respectfully, keeping the things that Walter loved about it while making it livable for someone my age. I found a box in the attic labeled Korea. Inside were letters, photos, medals, and a journal Walter had kept during his service. I spent an entire weekend reading through everything. Crying over the things this man had experienced and never fully processed with anyone who cared enough to understand. I'm having the journal professionally preserved, and I'm working with a local historical society to create an oral history project based on Walter's writings and stories. His experiences won't be forgotten. I'll make sure of that. As for the money, I'm trying to be smart. I've invested most of it conservatively. I'm living comfortably but not extravagantly. I donate regularly to causes Walter cared about. I've secretly paid off the student loans of 3 of my former teaching colleagues who were struggling. I tipped a waitress at Rosie's $10,000 one day just because I could and because she reminded me of someone Walter had mentioned in his stories. Sometimes people recognize me from the news coverage. Most are kind. Some are judgmental. I've learned to live with both. My friends and family know everything now, and they've been mostly supportive. My mom worries that I'm going to be targeted by scammers or gold diggers. The irony is not lost on me. My dad wants me to invest in his friend's business. I politely declined. My younger sister just wants me to be happy, which I appreciate more than she knows. Dating has become complicated. How do you tell someone you're a millionaire without wondering if that's the only reason they're interested? I've started just telling women I'm between jobs and living off savings. Not entirely a lie. I still go to Rosie's diner regularly. I sit at the counter where Walter and I sat, order the cheeseburger, and think about that night. The owner, Rosie herself, knows the story. She framed Walter's last receipt and hung it behind the counter with a little plaque that says in memory of Walter Brennan, who reminded us that listening is an act of love. Sometimes I talk to the other customers at the counter. I ask them questions about their lives, their work, their experiences. I listen, really listen, the way Walter taught me to. I've heard amazing stories from a woman who survived the Khmer Rouge regime, from a former circus performer, from a man who'd walked across America twice. Every person has a story worth hearing if you just take the time to ask. I don't know if I deserve this money. I've stopped trying to figure that out. Walter thought I did, and that's enough. He gave me a gift, not just the money, but the reminder that human connection matters. That being seen and heard is a fundamental human need. That kindness, real kindness, is rarer than we'd like to admit. So yeah, I inherited $8.7 million from a man I met once at a diner. His family sued me, the internet judged me, and my entire life changed overnight. It's been the strangest, most overwhelming, most beautiful, most painful experience of my life. And I'd do it all again, just for those 2 hours with Walter. Just to have given him one evening where he felt like he mattered. Because he did matter. He mattered a lot.